Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Tausret in Total War Pharaoh Dynasties, who like Amon Mes is also an economic powerhouse, though from a bit of a different perspective than Amon Mes. Amon Mes is very focused on the gold aspect and transforming that gold into other resources. Tausret just literally generates a lot of resources in her campaign and makes full use of them. And also, unlike Amon Mes, she actually has a more diverse and good roster. She doesn't have anywhere near as good archers as Amon Mes, but she does have infantry, and she has probably some of the best chariots in the game. Certainly the best chariots in Egypt. Though I'm not too fond of chariots, because the problem with chariots, there's too many entities, and you're like 42 freaking chariots per unit, and they get stuck, they die, you lose models. It's not really a great situation over there. I feel there should be far fewer models per unit for chariots. Not sure why they went with so damn many of them, because it really limits their potential in a lot of ways in battles. Regardless of that, starting with a discussion on her command. Her active command is not particularly great. She does give you some resources, and she also doubles the resource gain for a province for one turn. But it's really the passive command that will work very well for Tausret, because she gains free uses of expert builders, which allow you instant construction for free, and repeating every 6 turns. It does have a 4-turn wind-up, so if you're using your active command, it will take 4 turns for it to wind up, and repeating every 6 turns after that. But the more territory you gain, the more regions you have, the more uses you will gain. So over here, in this particular situation, I have 4 regions in my initial province, so I have 7 regions, and I've gotten 2 uses of free uses of expert builders. So I can instantly construct for free 2 buildings, and it will get better and better as I play this campaign. So this is one of the things about Tausret. She has a lot of scalability in her campaign from an economic perspective and from that free building perspective as well. Now, she has a bit of a complicated situation with her dynasty state of affairs, because, yeah, she does start married with Seti, and the children are going to be Seti, so you may wish to arrange a divorce over here with him and get yourself another husband. Though, at the same time, there are certainly going to be benefits that you are going to be able to get from being married with Seti, like, all that massive presence. And in fact, that marriage does make it so that she has a lot of statistics in her campaign from the very, very beginning. So does Seti, I might add, and she is better than Seti in every way. Better native roster, better faction roster, better effects. I mean, Seti does gain a lot of benefits from post-battle loot, but Tausret is really the powerhouse over here in a campaign from a lot of ways. She's the one carrying this marriage, let's just put it like that. But you are probably going to be forced to fight the civil war in order to secure the power of Pharaoh. So if you're looking to really play through this particular campaign and gain that kind of level of power, you are going to have to trigger the civil war over here and go for the throne. Though keep in mind, you probably will need a good amount of legitimacy in order to do so. Say we'll probably join you, weirdly enough, against his own dad. Or maybe he won't. Regardless of that shouldn't manage your decisions. But keep in mind, it is going to be complicated because of this dynasty situation that you do have with Seti over there. Maybe the best thing you could do in this campaign is try and confederate Seti in a campaign, but it is actually going to be tricky to manage to do so. Maybe some region trading would be in order over there. Now, in terms of faction buildings and faction units, let's talk about that situation. She gets a bunch of resource buildings. Now, other people do have similar buildings to this, but Tausret does have the best ones of any particular faction. So we're talking here about the production buildings. The uniqueness that Tausret has is, one, she's generating more resources, so more food, more bronze, more gold, more stone and wood over here. And also, quite crucially, she does get that extra benefit of production plus 20% to all resources for every free production building. She loses a bit of happiness, but that's not really going to be any real problem in her campaign over here, because you do have plenty of ways of dealing with that, especially because you do start worshipping Isis, who does give you happiness. One of the things to always keep in mind about the gods is the god you're going for can depend heavily on the campaign. So for most factions, worrying about happiness is not important. For Tausret, it might be very, very important. And here's another thing about these buildings. You can also construct them in minor settlements. So all those extra production that you can get for a lot of buildings can also work for minor settlements. So you can end up with a massive increase of resources over here in Tausret's campaign. Now, in terms of native units and faction-specific units, you do start in Upper Egypt, so that means you have access to the Upper Egyptian roster. Things like Upper Egyptian conscripted axemen, which might be light, but they're certainly trending towards the medium level. And then you start talking about spearmen, you start talking about swordsmen, you start talking about javelin throwers, and once you get to the highest possible tier, you get Kopeshi warriors, which are certainly heading towards heavy infantry level. Make a mace axe warriors. How the hell do you make that work? Anyway, then Upper Egyptian renowned archers, which are pretty solid, not the best obviously, and chariots. In terms of unique units, you have a whole bunch of infantry available over here through the infantry complex, getting into things like Egyptian axemen, lightly armored, but certainly quite capable of holding their own. And really, it says light, but honestly, the Queen's Guard is very much a medium infantry unit over there, regardless of what that says. Certainly, Egyptian axemen are light units. But then one benefit she actually has early on, not so much in terms of late game scaling, is her unique archers. So you get Egyptian archers with two-handed axes and with clubs. Now, the club situation may not necessarily be the best, but you do have a good amount of armor piercing. But the axe situation, well, you get units and melee. Remember this, ranged units and melee may not have the best HP, but decent level of armor for Egyptian units, and a huge amount of lethality for those Egyptian archers with two-handed axes. And then you get a whole bunch of chariots, culminating in some really powerful chariots, certainly very heavy armor for these ones, as far as chariots go, and they're ranged chariots as well. So you can do a lot of damage from range, and this is the thing, lethality on them. Maybe ranged chariots should have more lethality considering, you know, fewer models, but all the same. I think that was the intent really over there for her with that. So you gain a huge amount of resources over time. You have a good command in terms of its passive effect, not so much in terms of the active effect. You do have a complicated situation. On top of that, Tausret may have access to the largest amount of landmarks in the entire freaking game. Her initial province, not the one she's going to go for, has 2 landmarks. And then you have another province over here to the north that also has more landmarks, free to be specific. So you can actually gain a huge amount of benefits over here through these particular landmarks in your campaign, and a good amount of legitimacy through those landmarks. And you're also close enough to the desert that can also provide you a good amount of resources: stone, bronze, gold, all that kind of stuff. And wood can be generated through the docks in the Nile. So you will have a huge cache of resources. But then the game recommends you go for the merchant. Now, I've said this before, the merchant is the single strongest ancient legacy, but is especially strong for Tausret. What makes Tausret so very special with the merchant is because of her position starting in Upper Egypt, she has access to every single resource within one turn. Be it the food of Lower Egypt, the bronze and stone, very high amounts of bronze and stone over here in the Western Desert, or the gold of Nubia. Sure, she can always send caravans further afield in Kush, Punt, and all the way over here if you want to go into Babylon. But by having all of these key resources available within one turn of distance, it means she can just keep sending caravans every 2 turns. 1 turn to get there, 1 turn to get back, and she will never run out of resources. Combine this with her extra generation of resources, ends up in a situation where she's generating a tremendous amount of resources to use. Gold, bronze, stone, it doesn't matter. Amun-Mes has a lot of benefits, don't get me wrong on that. But Tausret, in terms of a long campaign, flat out, from my perspective at the very least, may at the very least have the best economy in the game from a practical standpoint. Amon Mes has more upfront benefits. Tausret has more long-term benefits in her campaign over here. Now, before I end the video over here, let's talk about royal decrees and let's talk about the gods. You will be able to get god dedication slots fairly quickly in this campaign because you are, I think you start, Affinity of the Forest, if I'm not mistaken. Regardless of that, though, you will be able to get these 2 slots available very, very quickly in her campaign, which gives you quite a few benefits. And then in terms of the gods, you do start with Isis. Now, I don't think Isis is necessarily the best god, but she does work very well for Tausret. The reason she works very well for Tausret is, as I said, you get that happiness benefit. Her special structures do cost happiness, so making up for that, more than making up for that, with all of that happiness is very significant. But on top of that, she gives you workforce growth from every shrine, which is very useful combined with Tausret's instant construction. The Devoted General and the prayers, not necessarily so beneficial, though certainly the attrition immunity can be particularly useful. What other gods would I recommend? Well, Horus is always really, really good because he gives you that movement range, which does stack with waypoint stations, and he gives you movement restored after battle. Not necessarily the best benefit in terms of speed or charge bonus to match Tausret's army, at least for most units, with the exception of course, the chariots. And the third god you might want to go for would be Vlad, because he does give you even more happiness, but more crucially, he gives you that labor cost for siege equipment, reduces enemy siege holdout time, and also gives you a construction cost decrease for resources, management, military, and support. All of these things combined. There are, of course, other options available that you could go for. Just avoid the moon. He's not particularly great from my perspective. You could go with Set if you want to improve the missile range for your units in range in a province you hold. Also, reload speed and range lethality for one particular army, but all the same. You also could go with Fa. Or maybe aim for a god outside of Egypt, like a Canaanite god could be useful. Maybe go for Moloch if you just want to trivialize how powerful your armies will be against masses of range units. Though typically speaking, you will be the one producing those masses of range units. And it's interesting to think about, the trailers. There's this idea that Tausret and Amon Mes are rivals in this game, but reality, you can get along very well with Amon Mes. So he's the only real problem in terms of masses of range units. The others, not quite as much. You will have better range units than most other factions or all other factions in Egypt. You could always talk about Ramesses, but he's got other things to worry about in his campaign. And you can be friends with Ramesses as well in a campaign situation. In point of fact, you do start with Vision with Ramesses. Obviously, you have Seti. Weirdly enough, when you're playing Amon Mes, you have Vision on Tausret, but when you're playing Tausret, you don't have Vision on Amon Mes. I guess they were trying to build up that rivalry, so if you don't have Vision, you cannot start building good diplomatic relations, but Amon Mes is far enough away that he won't be too much of an issue. So that is all. That's all I had to say with respect to Tausret. Can be some complications with the dynasty aspect. That's honestly the biggest downside of this campaign, but otherwise, you're in a very, very strong situation. Costin, signing out.